Question 1. Compliance review shows that during a pre-flight inspection, a pilot noted a slight discoloration on a control surface hinge. The pilot, under pressure to depart on schedule, decided not to log this observation as it appeared minor and did not seem to affect the control surface's movement. Which approach best adheres to the regulatory framework for the air school entrance exam? Option A. Inform the ground crew verbally about the discoloration and ask them to keep an eye on it during future inspections without formal logging. Option B. Proceed with the flight, but make a mental note to check the discoloration again after landing. Option C. Log the discoloration as a minor discrepancy and follow the documented procedure for its assessment and potential rectification before flight. Option D. Proceed with the flight, assuming the discoloration is cosmetic and will not impact flight safety, and address it at a later scheduled maintenance check. Correct answer is C. Log the discoloration as a minor discrepancy and follow the documented procedure for its assessment and potential rectification before flight. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate a situation where a perceived shortcut could lead to a breach of established regulatory procedures designed to ensure safety and operational integrity within the aviation sector. Pressure to meet deadlines or operational demands can create a temptation to bypass or expedite certain checks, but adherence to the regulatory framework is paramount. Careful judgment is required to balance operational efficiency with the non-negotiable requirement of regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves meticulously following the documented procedures for reporting and rectifying any discrepancies found during pre-flight checks, even if they appear minor. This aligns with the absolute priority of regulatory compliance as mandated by the air school entrance exam's governing framework. Specifically, the regulatory framework emphasizes a proactive and documented approach to safety, requiring all findings, regardless of perceived significance, to be logged and addressed according to established protocols. This ensures accountability, allows for trend analysis, and prevents the escalation of minor issues into significant safety concerns. Adherence to these procedures is not merely a procedural step, but a fundamental ethical obligation to ensure the safety of all involved in aviation operations. An incorrect approach that involves overlooking or informally addressing a minor discrepancy fails to uphold the regulatory framework's intent. Such an approach creates a significant regulatory and ethical failure by introducing an element of subjectivity and potential for error into a system designed for objective adherence. It undermines the principle of see and avoid, not just in the air, but also on the ground during pre-flight inspections, where every detail matters. Furthermore, failing to document the discrepancy and its resolution means there is no official record, which can have serious implications during audits or investigations, potentially leading to penalties and a loss of operational privileges. Another incorrect approach, which is to assume the discrepancy will resolve itself or is insignificant without proper verification, is equally problematic. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the precautionary principle inherent in aviation safety regulations. The regulatory framework requires active verification and resolution, not passive hope. This can lead to a situation where a latent defect goes unaddressed, posing a direct risk to flight safety. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements, a commitment to thoroughness, and the courage to prioritize compliance over expediency. When faced with a discrepancy, the professional should first consult the relevant operational manuals and regulatory guidelines. If the situation is unclear, seeking guidance from a supervisor or designated authority is the appropriate step. The core principle is to always err on the side of caution and ensure that all actions are documented and compliant with the established framework. Question 2. The monitoring system demonstrates a subtle, intermittent fluctuation in a critical engine parameter that is currently within acceptable operational limits but has not been previously observed. The flight is on a tight schedule, and diverting or delaying would cause significant disruption to passengers and subsequent operations. The pilot is confident that the aircraft is currently safe to fly and that the fluctuation might be a sensor anomaly. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Log the anomaly in the technical log for maintenance to investigate at the next scheduled stop and continue the flight as planned. Option B. Attempt to troubleshoot the anomaly by adjusting other engine parameters to see if the fluctuation stabilizes and only report if it worsens. Option C. Continue the flight as normal, assuming the fluctuation is a minor sensor issue that will resolve itself, and make a note to mention it casually to maintenance upon return. Option D. Immediately inform air traffic control and the airline's operations center of the anomaly and request guidance on whether to continue the flight or divert. Correct answer is A. Log the anomaly in the technical log for maintenance to investigate at the next scheduled stop and continue the flight as planned. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a conflict between operational efficiency and the ethical imperative to report potential safety deviations. The pilot must exercise sound judgment, considering the immediate operational pressures against the long-term implications of compromised safety reporting. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the desire to maintain schedule and avoid disruption with the absolute requirement to uphold aviation safety standards. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the anomaly to the appropriate authorities, even if it appears minor or potentially attributable to a transient issue. This aligns with the fundamental ethical and regulatory principles of aviation safety, which prioritize transparency and proactive identification of risks. Specifically, aviation regulations, such as those enforced by the Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAB, in the UK, mandate the reporting of incidents and occurrences that could affect aviation safety. This proactive reporting allows for thorough investigation, identification of root causes, and implementation of preventative measures, thereby safeguarding the wider aviation community. The ethical duty of care extends to ensuring that no potential safety hazard, however small it may seem, is overlooked. An incorrect approach of downplaying or ignoring the anomaly would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Such an approach violates the principle of see something, say something, which is foundational to aviation safety culture. It risks allowing a latent defect or operational issue to persist, potentially leading to more serious incidents in the future. Furthermore, deliberately withholding information that could impact safety is a breach of professional conduct and could have severe legal and professional repercussions. Another incorrect approach of attempting to self-diagnose and rectify the issue without proper reporting is also professionally unacceptable. While a pilot's technical expertise is valued, the regulatory framework requires formal reporting and investigation processes for anomalies that could affect airworthiness or operational safety. Circumventing these established procedures undermines the integrity of the safety management system and deprives regulatory bodies of the opportunity to conduct a comprehensive assessment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear hierarchy of priorities: safety first, followed by regulatory compliance, and then operational considerations. When faced with an anomaly, the pilot should 1. Assess the immediate safety implications. 2. Consult the relevant aircraft operating manual and company procedures. 3. If the anomaly could impact safety or airworthiness, initiate the formal reporting procedure without delay. 4. Cooperate fully with any subsequent investigation. This systematic approach ensures that all potential risks are addressed in accordance with established safety protocols and ethical obligations. Question 3. Cost-benefit analysis shows that delaying a critical maintenance check on a training aircraft to complete a scheduled flight would save the flight school significant operational costs and avoid passenger inconvenience. However, the aircraft has a minor, intermittent electrical fault that has been logged but not yet fully diagnosed or repaired. The flight instructor is aware of the fault and the potential cost savings of proceeding with the flight. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound course of action for the flight instructor? Option A. Proceed with the flight but inform the passengers of the minor electrical fault, allowing them to decide if they wish to fly. Option B. Refuse to fly the aircraft until the electrical fault is fully diagnosed and repaired, regardless of the cost or schedule implications. Option C. Proceed with the flight as scheduled, as the fault is minor and the cost savings are substantial, with a plan to address the maintenance after the flight. Option D. Attempt a temporary fix for the electrical fault before the flight, based on the instructor's experience, to ensure it does not interfere with operations. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the flight as scheduled, as the fault is minor and the cost savings are substantial, with a plan to address the maintenance after the flight. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits immediate financial gain against long-term safety and regulatory compliance. The pressure to reduce costs can be significant, But aviation safety is paramount and non-negotiable. Careful judgment is required to balance operational efficiency with the absolute necessity of adhering to safety standards and regulations. The correct approach involves prioritizing the safety of passengers and crew above all else, even if it means incurring additional costs or delaying operations. This aligns with the fundamental ethical duty of care in aviation and strict adherence to the Air School Entrance Exams regulatory framework, which emphasizes safety as the primary consideration in all operational decisions. Specifically, regulations governing flight operations and maintenance mandate that all equipment must be in airworthy condition and that any identified defects must be rectified before flight. Ignoring a known issue, even if seemingly minor, to save money or time would be a direct violation of these safety-focused regulations and a breach of professional ethics. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the flight despite the identified issue, arguing that the cost of immediate repair outweighs the perceived risk. This fails to acknowledge the inherent unpredictability of aviation and the potential for even minor issues to escalate into catastrophic failures. Such a decision would violate the core principle of aviation safety, which demands a precautionary approach. Another incorrect approach would be to defer the repair to a later date without proper assessment of the immediate risk, hoping it doesn't manifest during the flight. This demonstrates a disregard for regulatory requirements and a failure to uphold the professional responsibility to ensure the aircraft's airworthiness at all times. A third incorrect approach might be to attempt a temporary fix without proper certification or engineering approval, which is a direct contravention of maintenance regulations and a severe safety risk. Professionals in aviation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the potential risks associated with any operational decision. This should be followed by a thorough review of relevant regulations and guidelines. If a decision involves potential safety implications, the default position must always be to err on the side of caution. This means consulting with relevant technical experts, seeking necessary approvals, and prioritizing safety over cost or schedule pressures. If a conflict arises, escalating the issue to higher management or regulatory authorities for guidance is a crucial step in ensuring responsible decision-making. Question 4. Investigation of a flight crew's decision-making process when a minor, intermittent electrical anomaly is detected during pre-flight checks and the aircraft is scheduled for a critical time-sensitive cargo flight. Option A. Delay the flight indefinitely until the anomaly is fully investigated and rectified, even if it means missing the cargo delivery deadline. Option B. Immediately report the anomaly to maintenance. Consult the minimum equipment list, MEL, for guidance on dispatching with the anomaly, and follow all documented procedures for defect rectification or deferral. Option C. Proceed with the flight as scheduled, assuming the anomaly is transient and will not affect flight safety, and document it for post-flight inspection. Option D. Attempt a quick, informal fix by resetting a circuit breaker without consulting maintenance or the MEL, and then proceed with the flight. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the anomaly to maintenance, consult the minimum equipment list, MEL, for guidance on dispatching with the anomaly, and follow all documented procedures for defect rectification or deferral. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between operational efficiency and the paramount importance of safety in aviation. The need to maintain flight schedules, often driven by commercial pressures, can create a temptation to overlook or downplay minor technical issues. However, aviation regulations are built on a foundation of zero tolerance for compromises that could impact safety. The professional challenge lies in navigating these pressures while adhering strictly to the established safety protocols and regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of identifying, assessing, and rectifying any deviation from operational standards, regardless of its perceived minor nature. This aligns with the core principles of process optimization in aviation, which prioritize safety above all else. Specifically, this approach adheres to the regulatory framework by ensuring that all maintenance actions are performed in accordance with approved procedures, and that any deferred defects are managed through a formal, risk-assessed process, often requiring specific authorization and clear timelines for rectification. This proactive and documented methodology minimizes the risk of latent defects escalating into safety-critical issues and ensures accountability. An incorrect approach that prioritizes expediency over thoroughness would be to bypass established maintenance checks or to defer reporting minor issues with the assumption they will resolve themselves or are insignificant. This directly violates regulatory requirements that mandate the reporting and rectification of all defects, however minor, as they could indicate a developing problem or a deviation from design specifications. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on informal verbal agreements for maintenance or to proceed with a flight without proper authorization for any deferred defects. This undermines the integrity of the maintenance record, creates ambiguity regarding the aircraft's airworthiness, and contravenes the strict documentation and authorization protocol stipulated by aviation authorities. Such actions introduce unacceptable levels of risk and erode the safety culture. Professionals in aviation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements and the organization's safety management system. When faced with a potential deviation, the first step is to consult the relevant manuals and procedures. A risk assessment should then be conducted, considering the potential impact on safety, operational continuity, and regulatory compliance. All actions and decisions must be meticulously documented. If there is any doubt about the airworthiness of the aircraft or the appropriateness of a proposed action, the decision should err on the side of caution, involving higher levels of technical authority or deferring the operation until the issue is fully resolved and documented. Question 5. System analysis indicates that the turnaround time for aircraft at a regional airport is consistently exceeding the target, impacting airline schedules. The ground operations team proposes streamlining the pre-flight inspection process by reducing the number of visual checks performed by the ground crew before each flight. This proposal aims to significantly decrease the time spent on these inspections. Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the entire pre-flight inspection checklist and procedures to identify opportunities for optimization that do not compromise safety, potentially involving technology integration or resequencing of tasks. Option B. Immediately approve the reduction in visual checks, as the team has identified a clear opportunity to enhance operational efficiency. Option C. Implement the proposed reduction in visual checks to improve turnaround times, as efficiency is a key performance indicator for ground operations. Option D. Defer the decision until a later date, as the current focus is on meeting immediate scheduling demands, and a full review of safety protocols would be too time-consuming. The correct answer is C. Implement the proposed reduction in visual checks to improve turnaround times, as efficiency is a key performance indicator for ground operations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the stringent safety and regulatory requirements inherent in aviation. The need to optimize processes, such as pre-flight checks, must be weighed against the absolute priority of ensuring aircraft airworthiness and passenger safety, as mandated by aviation authorities. Misjudging this balance can lead to significant safety risks and regulatory noncompliance. The correct approach involves a systematic review of the existing pre-flight check procedures to identify bottlenecks or inefficiencies without compromising the thoroughness or safety aspects of the checks. This might involve reordering tasks, optimizing the use of technology, or improving communication between ground crew and flight crew, all while ensuring that every critical safety item remains adequately inspected and verified. This aligns with the overarching regulatory framework for aviation safety, which emphasizes a proactive and meticulous approach to aircraft maintenance and operation. Specifically, regulations like those established by the Civil Aviation Authority, CAA, in the UK, assuming this is the jurisdiction for the Air School entrance exam, mandate that all pre-flight inspections are conducted to a defined standard to ensure the aircraft is fit for flight. Process optimization in this context means enhancing the efficiency of meeting these standards, not reducing the standards themselves. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering the impact on safety would be professionally unacceptable. For instance, reducing the number of inspection points or shortening the time allocated for specific checks, even if it speeds up the turnaround time, directly violates the spirit and letter of safety regulations. This failure stems from prioritizing a secondary objective, speed, over a primary, non-negotiable one, safety. Another incorrect approach might involve implementing new technologies or procedures without adequate validation or training for personnel. This could lead to errors or omissions in the inspection process, again compromising safety and potentially violating regulatory requirements for the introduction of new operational methods. Such actions demonstrate a lack of due diligence and a disregard for established safety protocols. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of regulatory mandates and safety objectives. Any proposed process optimization must be rigorously evaluated against these primary requirements. A risk assessment should be conducted to identify potential safety implications of any proposed change. Furthermore, consultation with experienced personnel and relevant regulatory bodies, where appropriate, is crucial. The decision-making process should prioritize safety and compliance, with efficiency gains being a secondary consideration that must not undermine the core objectives. Question 6. The assessment process reveals that the current aircraft turnaround time at a regional airport is significantly longer than at comparable facilities, impacting airline profitability. To address this, a proposal is made to streamline pre-flight checks by reducing the number of mandatory visual inspections performed by ground crew, arguing that modern aircraft systems have advanced self-diagnostic capabilities. Option A. Immediately implement the reduction in visual inspections to improve turnaround times and enhance airline profitability, as the proposal is based on the perceived advancements in aircraft technology. Option B. Propose a pilot program to reduce visual inspections on a small subset of aircraft for a limited period, without prior consultation with the CAA, to gather data on potential time savings. Option C. Increase the workload of the flight crew by delegating more pre-flight checks to them, thereby reducing the reliance on ground crew and their inspection times. Option D. Implement the proposed reduction in visual inspections after a thorough review of the aircraft manufacturer's maintenance manuals and consultation with the Civil Aviation Authority, CA, to ensure compliance with all safety directives and operational regulations. The correct answer is D. Implement the proposed reduction in visual inspections after a thorough review of the aircraft manufacturer's maintenance manuals and consultation with the Civil Aviation Authority, CA, to ensure compliance with all safety directives and operational regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between maintaining operational efficiency and adhering to stringent safety regulations. The need to optimize processes, such as flight scheduling and maintenance checks, must be balanced against the absolute priority of passenger safety, which is paramount in aviation. Misjudging this balance can lead to severe consequences, including accidents, regulatory penalties, and reputational damage. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes to identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies, followed by the implementation of data-driven improvements that demonstrably enhance safety margins or maintain them while increasing efficiency. This approach prioritizes a thorough understanding of how changes impact safety protocols and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it requires consulting relevant aviation authorities' guidelines and regulations, such as those outlined by the Civil Aviation Authority, CA, in the UK, to ensure any proposed optimization aligns with or exceeds current safety standards. This proactive engagement with regulatory frameworks ensures that process improvements do not inadvertently compromise safety. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without a comprehensive safety impact assessment would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for regulatory mandates that place safety above all other considerations. For instance, reducing the frequency of critical maintenance checks to save time or money, without explicit regulatory approval based on rigorous risk assessment, directly violates the spirit and letter of aviation safety laws. Another incorrect approach might involve adopting new technologies or procedures without adequate training or validation, potentially introducing new risks. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to guidelines that mandate thorough testing and personnel competency before operational deployment. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape. This involves identifying all applicable laws, regulations, and industry best practices. The next step is to assess the potential impact of any proposed process change on safety, operational integrity, and regulatory compliance. This assessment should be evidence-based, utilizing data and expert judgment. Finally, decisions should be made only after confirming that the proposed changes not only meet but ideally enhance safety standards, and that all regulatory requirements are satisfied. Question 7. When evaluating potential process optimizations for the Air School Entrance Exams Flight Training Program, which approach best balances efficiency with the absolute priority of regulatory compliance and safety? Option A. Introducing a new, unapproved flight simulator program that offers advanced features, even if it deviates from the established training syllabus, to enhance student engagement. Option B. Implementing a streamlined assessment checklist that reduces the time instructors spend on practical flight evaluations, focusing on speed of completion. Option C. Prioritizing cost savings by reducing the hours allocated for instructor recurrent training, assuming instructors possess sufficient prior experience. Option D. Conducting a comprehensive review of the entire training syllabus and assessment procedures to identify areas for improvement, ensuring all proposed changes are rigorously vetted against the Air School Entrance Exams regulatory framework and safety standards. The correct answer is B. Implementing a streamlined assessment checklist that reduces the time instructors spend on practical flight evaluations, focusing on speed of completion. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient process optimization within an aviation school with the absolute priority of adhering to the regulatory framework governing pilot training. The pressure to improve training turnaround times can create a temptation to bypass streamline procedures in ways that might compromise safety or regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any process improvements do not inadvertently introduce risks or violate established standards. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing training processes, identifying bottlenecks, and proposing changes that are demonstrably compliant with the Air School Entrance Exams regulatory framework. This approach prioritizes safety and compliance by ensuring that any optimization efforts are vetted against established rules and guidelines. Specifically, it aligns with the overarching principle of aviation safety, which mandates that all training activities must adhere to the highest standards of regulatory compliance. The Air School Entrance Exams guidelines likely emphasize thoroughness, accuracy, and adherence to established syllabi and assessment criteria. Any process change must be evaluated for its impact on these core elements, ensuring that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of training quality or regulatory adherence. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on reducing the time taken for practical flight assessments without a corresponding review of the assessment criteria or instructor oversight would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the regulatory requirement to ensure that all pilots meet specific competency standards before certification. Another incorrect approach, such as implementing a new, unapproved simulation software that deviates from the prescribed training syllabus, would also be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This violates the principle of standardized training and assessment, potentially leading to pilots being inadequately prepared for real-world flight conditions and failing to meet the specific learning objectives mandated by the regulatory body. A third incorrect approach, prioritizing cost reduction in instructor training over the quality and comprehensiveness of the training provided, would also be problematic. This could lead to instructors not being adequately equipped to deliver the required curriculum or assess student performance effectively, thereby compromising the integrity of the training program and its compliance with regulatory standards. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory framework. Any proposed process optimization should be evaluated against these regulations, considering potential impacts on safety, training quality, and student outcomes. A risk assessment should be conducted for any proposed changes, and stakeholder consultation, including instructors and regulatory bodies if necessary, is crucial. The ultimate goal is to achieve efficiency gains without compromising the core mission of producing safe and competent aviators in full compliance with all governing laws and guidelines. Question 8. Benchmark analysis indicates that a regional airline is experiencing significant delays during its aircraft turnaround operations, impacting its on-time performance metrics. The operations department is proposing several process optimization strategies to improve efficiency. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the absolute priority of regulatory compliance and safety in aviation? Option A. Conduct a thorough risk assessment of all proposed process changes, ensuring each optimization strategy is validated against current aviation safety regulations and operational guidelines before implementation. Option B. Reduce the frequency of routine engine maintenance checks by extending the operational hours between inspections, citing potential cost savings. Option C. Implement a revised pre-flight inspection checklist that reduces the number of checks based on historical data, suggesting a low probability of critical faults. Option D. Introduce a new, uncertified flight planning software that promises faster route calculations without undergoing a formal safety validation process. The correct answer is C. Implement a revised pre-flight inspection checklist that reduces the number of checks based on historical data, suggesting a low probability of critical faults. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for operational efficiency with the paramount importance of safety and regulatory compliance in aviation. The pressure to meet performance targets can create a temptation to overlook or expedite critical safety procedures, which is a direct contravention of aviation's core principles. Careful judgment is required to ensure that process optimization efforts do not compromise the integrity of safety management systems or violate established aviation regulations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, data-driven review of existing processes to identify inefficiencies without compromising safety protocols. This aligns with the fundamental principles of aviation safety management, which prioritize risk mitigation and continuous improvement. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit of regulations that mandate robust safety management systems, SMS, and require all operational changes to be assessed for their impact on safety. The approach emphasizes a proactive and analytical method, ensuring that any proposed changes are thoroughly vetted against safety standards and regulatory requirements before implementation. This ensures that the pursuit of efficiency is always secondary to, and in support of, maintaining the highest safety standards. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that focuses solely on reducing turnaround times by streamlining pre-flight checks without a corresponding safety risk assessment fails to adhere to regulatory mandates for thorough safety procedures. Aviation regulations, such as those governing flight crew duties and aircraft maintenance, explicitly detail the non-negotiable steps required before flight. Bypassing or inadequately performing these checks constitutes a direct violation of these safety regulations and introduces unacceptable risks. An approach that prioritizes cost reduction by reducing the frequency of mandatory equipment inspection, even if based on a superficial interpretation of optimization, is ethically and regulatorily unsound. Aviation authorities prescribe specific inspection intervals based on extensive research and historical data to ensure airworthiness. Deviating from these intervals without rigorous, data-backed justification and regulatory approval is a severe breach of safety protocols and a direct violation of airworthiness directives. An approach that implements new software for flight planning without a comprehensive validation of its safety implications and compliance with air traffic control Act communication protocols is also problematic. Aviation software must meet stringent certification standards to ensure reliability and interoperability. Implementing unvalidated systems can lead to communication errors, navigation inaccuracies, and potential conflicts with ATC, all of which are serious safety and regulatory concerns. Professional reasoning. Professionals in aviation must adopt a decision-making framework that places safety and regulatory compliance at the forefront of all operational considerations. This involves a hierarchical approach where safety is the non-negotiable foundation. When considering process optimization, the initial step must always be a thorough risk assessment to identify potential safety impacts. Any proposed optimization must then be evaluated against relevant aviation regulations and guidelines. If a proposed change has the potential to impact safety, it must be rejected or modified until it can be proven to be at least as safe as, if not safer than, the existing process, and fully compliant with all applicable laws. Continuous monitoring and feedback loops are essential to ensure that implemented changes do not introduce unforeseen risks. Question 9. Analysis of a pilot's decision-making process when encountering deteriorating weather conditions during the final approach to an airport, where the reported visibility is at the absolute minimum threshold for landing, and a passenger expresses significant concern about missing a critical connection. Option A. Rely on personal experience and a feel for the conditions to determine if a landing is still feasible, despite the reported minimum visibility. Option B. Proceed with the landing attempt, carefully monitoring conditions and being prepared for an immediate go-around if visibility drops further. Option C. Attempt the landing but inform air traffic control that the decision is influenced by the passenger's urgent need to make a connection. Option D. Initiate a go-around and request vectors to an alternate airport due to the visibility being at the minimum threshold, prioritizing adherence to safety regulations. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the landing attempt, carefully monitoring conditions and being prepared for an immediate go-around if visibility drops further. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a pilot's duty to ensure the safety of flight and the potential pressure, perceived or real, to adhere to a schedule or accommodate passenger requests. The pilot must exercise sound judgment, prioritizing safety above all else, even when faced with circumstances that might tempt a deviation from standard procedures. Careful consideration of the regulatory framework is paramount to making the correct decision. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the weather conditions against the established minimums for the intended flight path and landing. This requires the pilot to consult official weather reports, forecasts, and any available advisories. If the conditions fall below the required minimums, the pilot must initiate a go-around or divert to an alternate airport. This decision is directly supported by the fundamental principles of aviation safety regulations, which mandate that pilots operate only within the limits of their aircraft's capabilities and the prevailing environmental conditions. Specifically, regulations governing instrument flight rules (IFR) and visual flight rules (VFR) clearly define minimum visibility, cloud clearance, and other parameters that must be met for safe operation. The pilot's primary responsibility is the safety of the aircraft, its passengers, and crew, as stipulated by aviation authorities. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the landing attempt despite the sub-minimum weather conditions. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to safety regulations and a disregard for the pilot's ultimate responsibility. Such an action could lead to a loss of situational awareness, spatial disorientation, or an inability to maintain control of the aircraft during the critical landing phase, potentially resulting in an accident. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the passenger's perceived urgency or a desire to avoid a delay. While customer service is important, it can never supersede safety. Making a decision based on passenger pressure, rather than objective safety criteria, is a severe ethical and regulatory breach. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to make a subjective judgment call without consulting all available and official weather data. Aviation safety relies on objective data and established procedures, not on gut feelings or assumptions, especially when safety margins are reduced. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, adheres strictly to regulations, and involves a systematic evaluation of all relevant factors. This framework includes 1. Identify the core issue. Is the flight safe to proceed as planned? 2. Gather information, consult all available and official weather data, aircraft performance charts, and regulatory requirements. 3. Evaluate options. Consider the risks and consequences of each potential course of action, continue, divert, go around. 4. Make a decision. Choose the option that best ensures the safety of the flight, in strict accordance with regulations. 5. Communicate. Inform relevant parties, air traffic control, passengers if appropriate, of the decision and the reasons for it. Question 10. Market research demonstrates a growing demand for specialized aviation consulting services in emerging markets. Your firm has been approached by a new prospective client seeking advice on establishing a new regional airline. This prospective client's business model appears to directly compete with a long-standing, significant client of your firm. What is the most professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Inform your existing client about the new prospective client's interest in your services and seek their permission before proceeding with any engagement. Option B. Conduct a detailed internal conflict of interest assessment. Review client agreements for confidentiality clauses, and if no insurmountable conflict exists, propose a clear engagement letter outlining strict information barriers and service limitations to the new prospective client. Option C. Immediately accept the new client's business to capitalize on the market opportunity, assuming that competition is a normal part of business and no direct information sharing will occur. Option D. Decline the new client's business outright due to the perceived competition, without conducting any formal assessment of potential conflicts or confidentiality risks. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed internal conflict of interest assessment. Review client agreements for confidentiality clauses, and if no insurmountable conflict exists, propose a clear engagement letter outlining strict information barriers and service limitations to the new prospective client. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the pursuit of new business opportunities with the ethical obligation to maintain client confidentiality and avoid conflicts of interest. The aviation industry, particularly in areas like aircraft sales and maintenance, often involves sensitive proprietary information. A professional must exercise careful judgment to ensure that any new engagement does not compromise existing client relationships or violate regulatory standards. The correct approach involves a thorough conflict of interest assessment and adherence to client confidentiality protocols. This means proactively identifying potential conflicts arising from the new client's business activities and ensuring that no confidential information from previous clients could be inadvertently used or disclosed. This aligns with the core principles of professional conduct expected within the aviation sector, which often mirrors broader financial and business ethics regulations, emphasizing trust, integrity, and the avoidance of situations where personal or firm interests could improperly influence professional judgment. Specifically, regulations governing professional conduct in aviation often mandate robust internal procedures for managing conflicts of interest and protecting client data. An incorrect approach that involves immediately pursuing the new business without a proper conflict check fails to uphold the duty of care owed to existing clients and breaches confidentiality obligations. This can lead to severe regulatory penalties, loss of reputation, and legal action. Another incorrect approach, which is to decline the business solely based on a vague fear of conflict without a structured assessment, is also professionally unsound. It represents a missed opportunity and a failure to apply a systematic decision-making process that could potentially resolve the conflict through appropriate safeguards. A third incorrect approach, which is to inform the existing client about the potential new business without their explicit consent, is a direct violation of confidentiality and could damage the existing client relationship. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework when faced with such situations. This framework typically involves 1. Identifying the potential ethical or regulatory issue, conflict of interest, confidentiality breach. 2. Gathering all relevant facts, including the nature of both clients' businesses and the specific services requested. 3. Consulting internal policies and relevant regulations. 4. Assessing the severity of any potential conflict and the feasibility of mitigation strategies. 5. Making a decision based on the assessment, prioritizing ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. 6. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale. Question 11. Compliance review shows that a critical operational impact assessment for a new flight procedure requires access to detailed air traffic control logs. The individual responsible for the assessment has identified that direct access to the logs is restricted and requires a formal request and approval process, which can take several days. The individual is under pressure to complete the assessment quickly. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates professional conduct and regulatory compliance in this situation? Option A. Immediately attempt to access the air traffic control logs through an unofficial, less secure channel to expedite the assessment. Option B. Initiate the formal request and approval process for accessing the air traffic control logs and proactively communicate with the relevant authorities to expedite the review while explaining the urgency. Option C. Proceed with the impact assessment using publicly available, less detailed information and acknowledge the limitations in the final report. Option D. Inform senior management that the assessment cannot be completed until the formal request process is fully exhausted, regardless of the urgency. The correct answer is A. Immediately attempt to access the air traffic control logs through an unofficial, less secure channel to expedite the assessment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for information with the regulatory obligation to protect sensitive data and ensure proper authorization. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the boundaries of permissible information access and the procedures for obtaining necessary approvals, particularly when dealing with potentially sensitive operational details. Careful judgment is required to avoid unauthorized disclosure or premature action based on incomplete or improperly obtained information. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to established protocols for requesting and accessing information, even if it causes a delay. This aligns with the fundamental principles of data protection and operational security mandated by aviation regulations. Specifically, it upholds the requirement for authorized access to sensitive information, preventing potential breaches or misuse. By following the proper channels, the individual demonstrates integrity and respect for the regulatory framework designed to maintain safety and security within the aviation sector. This methodical process ensures that any subsequent actions are based on verified and legitimately accessed data, thereby mitigating risks and maintaining compliance. An incorrect approach that involves directly accessing the restricted system without authorization represents a significant regulatory failure. This action bypasses established security protocols and could lead to unauthorized disclosure of sensitive operational data, violating privacy and security regulations. It demonstrates a disregard for the established governance structures and could have severe consequences, including disciplinary action and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which is to rely on informal channels or hearsay to obtain the information, is also professionally unacceptable. This method lacks the rigor and verification necessary for critical decision-making in an aviation context. Information obtained informally is often incomplete, inaccurate, or biased, leading to flawed assessments and potentially unsafe operational decisions. It fails to meet the standards of due diligence and evidence-based practice required by aviation authorities. A further incorrect approach, which is to delay the impact assessment indefinitely due to perceived bureaucratic hurdles, is equally problematic. While adherence to procedure is crucial, an indefinite delay in a critical assessment can itself lead to operational risks or missed opportunities. A professional decision-making process should involve identifying the most efficient yet compliant path to obtain the necessary information. This includes understanding the urgency of the assessment, proactively engaging with the relevant authorities to expedite the approval process, and clearly communicating any unavoidable delays and their justifications. Professionals should always strive to find a balance between regulatory compliance and operational effectiveness, seeking clarification and guidance when faced with procedural ambiguities. Question 12. Research into the potential impact of a proposed new flight path on local communities has generated a significant amount of data, including personal details of residents who participated in initial consultations. A journalist from a reputable aviation publication requests access to this data to write an article about the community's perspective. What is the most appropriate approach to managing this request? Option A. Conduct a thorough impact assessment to determine the necessity and legality of sharing any personal data, anonymizing or aggregating information where possible, and seeking explicit consent for any identifiable data to be shared. Option B. Provide the journalist with all the raw data collected from the consultations, as transparency is crucial for public understanding of aviation projects. Option C. Inform the journalist that no information can be shared due to strict confidentiality policies, without further investigation into the nature of the data or the request. Option D. Share the personal details of the residents with the journalist, as they are members of the public and the information is relevant to their article. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough impact assessment to determine the necessity and legality of sharing any personal data, anonymizing or aggregating information where possible, and seeking explicit consent for any identifiable data to be shared. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect sensitive data. Challenge lies in discerning what information can be shared without breaching confidentiality or violating data protection laws, which are paramount in aviation and any professional setting. Careful judgment is required to avoid both oversharing and undersharing, ensuring that decisions are informed by a thorough understanding of applicable regulations. The correct approach involves a structured impact assessment that prioritizes data privacy and regulatory compliance. This approach is right because it systematically evaluates the potential consequences of sharing information, ensuring that any disclosure is necessary, proportionate, and legally permissible. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of data protection, such as the need-to-know basis for information sharing and the requirement for explicit consent or a clear legal basis for processing personal data. Adhering to these principles prevents breaches of confidentiality and maintains trust with stakeholders. An incorrect approach that involves sharing the requested information without a formal assessment fails to uphold regulatory obligations. This could lead to breaches of data protection laws, such as those governing the handling of personal or commercially sensitive information, resulting in significant penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which is to refuse all requests for information outright, might be overly cautious and hinder legitimate operational needs or collaborative efforts, potentially impacting safety or efficiency, and failing to exercise professional discretion where appropriate. A third incorrect approach, which is to share information based on personal relationships or perceived urgency without verifying the legitimacy of the request or the recipient's authorization, directly violates principles of data security and professional conduct, exposing the organization to significant risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the nature of the information requested and the requester. This should be followed by a review of relevant policies and regulations governing data disclosure. If there is any doubt, seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments is essential. The decision to share information should always be based on a clear understanding of the purpose, necessity, and legality of the disclosure, ensuring that all data protection requirements are met. Question 13. The efficiency study reveals potential cost savings by reducing the frequency of certain aircraft maintenance checks and streamlining instructor scheduling, but these changes could potentially impact the depth of practical flight experience for student pilots. Which approach best aligns with the regulatory framework governing aviation training? Option A. Implement the efficiency measures immediately to realize cost savings, assuming instructors can compensate for any perceived reduction in practical experience through enhanced theoretical instruction. Option B. Propose a revised training syllabus that incorporates the efficiency measures, arguing that the cost savings will allow for greater investment in advanced simulation technology, thereby offsetting any reduction in practical flight time. Option C. Implement the efficiency measures selectively, focusing on those that do not appear to have a direct impact on flight operations, while deferring a full safety review until after the cost savings have been realized. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment of the proposed efficiency measures on flight safety, regulatory compliance, and training quality, prioritizing adherence to established safety protocols and training standards over immediate cost reductions. The correct answer is A. Implement the efficiency measures immediately to realize cost savings, assuming instructors can compensate for any perceived reduction in practical experience through enhanced theoretical instruction. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the efficiency study's findings, while potentially beneficial for resource allocation, directly conflict with established safety protocols and regulatory requirements. The core tension lies between achieving operational cost savings and upholding the paramount duty of ensuring flight safety, which is non-negotiable in aviation. A professional decision requires a rigorous assessment of the study's implications against the backdrop of the air school entrance exams governing regulatory framework, which prioritizes safety above all else. The correct approach involves a thorough impact assessment that prioritizes regulatory compliance and safety over immediate cost reductions. This means meticulously evaluating how the proposed efficiency measures might affect training standards, aircraft maintenance schedules, instructor oversight, and emergency procedures. If any aspect of the study's recommendations could compromise safety or violate existing regulations, they must be rejected or significantly modified. This approach aligns with the fundamental ethical and regulatory obligation in aviation to prevent accidents and ensure the highest standards of pilot training and operational integrity. The regulatory framework for aviation training, as implicitly understood by an air school entrance exam, mandates adherence to strict safety standards and approved training syllabi, which cannot be overridden by a cost-saving initiative without comprehensive safety validation. An incorrect approach would be to implement the efficiency measures without a comprehensive safety review, assuming that cost savings automatically translate to improved overall operations. This fails to acknowledge the unique risks inherent in aviation training and the stringent regulatory oversight required. Another incorrect approach would be to selectively implement parts of the study that appear to have no immediate safety impact, while ignoring potential indirect or long-term consequences. This demonstrates a superficial understanding of risk management in aviation, where seemingly minor changes can have cascading effects on safety. Furthermore, prioritizing cost savings over regulatory compliance, even if the regulations are perceived as burdensome, constitutes a severe ethical and regulatory failure. The regulatory framework for aviation training is designed to mitigate inherent risks, and any deviation without proper authorization and safety justification is unacceptable. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all applicable regulations and safety standards. Next, they must critically analyze the proposed changes, such as those from an efficiency study, to determine their potential impact on these standards. A risk assessment should be conducted, identifying potential hazards and their likelihood and severity. If the proposed changes introduce unacceptable risks or violate regulations, they must be rejected or modified to ensure compliance and maintain safety. This process requires a commitment to continuous learning about evolving regulations and best practices in aviation safety and training. Question 14. Comparative studies suggest that candidates preparing for rigorous entrance examinations often seek to understand the scope and difficulty of the material. If a candidate for the air school entrance exam, facing a question about air traffic control procedures, realizes they lack specific, up-to-date details on a particular protocol, which of the following represents the most professionally sound and compliant course of action? Option A. Search online forums and unofficial aviation enthusiast websites for discussions or summaries related to the specific protocol. Option B. Discreetly inquire with current air traffic control students or instructors about the specific protocol details they recall from recent training. Option C. Consult official, publicly available aviation regulations, advisory circulars, and the official syllabus or study guide provided by the air school for the entrance exam. Option D. Make an educated guess based on general knowledge of aviation principles and common sense, assuming the protocol is likely to be a standard one. The correct answer is B. Discreetly inquire with current air traffic control students or instructors about the specific protocol details they recall from recent training. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect sensitive data. The pressure to provide a quick answer, especially in a high-stakes environment like an entrance exam, can lead to shortcuts that compromise integrity. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken are compliant with established protocols and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a systematic and compliant method of information gathering. This means acknowledging the limitations of direct access to proprietary exam materials and instead focusing on publicly available, officially sanctioned resources. This approach upholds academic integrity by preventing the use of unfair advantages and adheres to the spirit of the air school entrance exams regulations, which are designed to assess a candidate's knowledge and aptitude fairly. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and respect for the examination process. An incorrect approach that involves attempting to access or solicit confidential exam content directly from current students or staff is a serious ethical and regulatory failure. This action constitutes a breach of academic integrity and potentially violates rules against cheating and the misuse of privileged information. Such behavior undermines the fairness of the examination process and can lead to severe penalties, including disqualification from the entrance exam and potential future academic or professional repercussions. Another incorrect approach, which is to fabricate or guess answers based on incomplete or unreliable information, also fails to meet professional standards. While not as overtly unethical as seeking confidential materials, it demonstrates a lack of diligence and a willingness to present unverified information as fact. This can lead to an inaccurate assessment of the candidate's abilities, which is detrimental to both the individual and the institution. It shows a disregard for the importance of accuracy and thoroughness in academic pursuits. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the rules and regulations governing the assessment. When faced with a knowledge gap or a difficult question, the professional should first consult authorized resources. If direct access to specific information is restricted, the professional should rely on general knowledge, logical deduction, and principles learned during preparation, while clearly indicating any assumptions made or limitations in the information. The paramount consideration should always be maintaining integrity and adhering to the established framework of the examination or assessment. Question 15. Compliance review shows that a proposed expansion of flight paths at a regional airport may significantly increase noise pollution over residential areas and potentially impact local wildlife habitats. The airport authority is considering several approaches to address these concerns. Option A. Conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment, including detailed noise modeling and wildlife studies, and engage with local communities and environmental agencies to develop mitigation strategies before approving the flight path expansion. Option B. Rely on existing, general aviation noise guidelines and assume that the impact on wildlife will be negligible, proceeding with the expansion without specific studies. Option C. Proceed with the flight path expansion to improve operational efficiency and address the environmental concerns through minor adjustments to flight schedules after operations have commenced. Option D. Postpone any detailed environmental assessment until after the flight path expansion is fully implemented, with the intention of addressing any issues that may arise at that time. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment, including detailed noise modeling and wildlife studies, and engage with local communities and environmental agencies to develop mitigation strategies before approving the flight path expansion. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an aviation professional to balance the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term implications of environmental impact and regulatory compliance. The decision-maker must consider not only current operational demands, but also the potential for future regulatory changes, public perception, and the ethical responsibility to minimize environmental harm. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both legally sound and professionally responsible. The correct approach involves conducting a comprehensive environmental impact assessment that considers all potential effects of the proposed operational changes, including noise pollution, emissions, and habitat disruption. This assessment should be thorough, transparent, and involve consultation with relevant stakeholders, including environmental agencies and local communities. This aligns with the principles of sustainable aviation and proactive regulatory adherence, ensuring that any operational adjustments are made in a manner that minimizes negative environmental consequences and anticipates future environmental regulations. This approach demonstrates a commitment to responsible corporate citizenship and risk mitigation. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings without a thorough environmental review fails to meet regulatory expectations and ethical standards. Such an approach risks significant penalties, reputational damage, and potential legal challenges if environmental regulations are violated or if unforeseen environmental consequences arise. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on existing, potentially outdated, environmental guidelines overlooks the dynamic nature of environmental law and the increasing global emphasis on sustainability. This can lead to noncompliance with evolving standards and a failure to adopt best practices, ultimately increasing long-term environmental and financial risks. A further incorrect approach that defers the environmental assessment to a later stage, assuming it will be a minor formality, is professionally negligent. This demonstrates a lack of foresight and a failure to integrate environmental considerations into the core decision-making process, potentially leading to costly retrofits or operational disruptions if significant environmental issues are discovered late in the process. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, identify the core issue and its potential impacts. Second, consult relevant regulatory frameworks and best practices. Third, engage with all affected stakeholders. Fourth, conduct thorough assessments, in this case, environmental. Fifth, evaluate the risks and benefits of different courses of action. And finally, make a decision that is legally compliant, ethically sound, and strategically beneficial in the long term. Question 16. Regulatory review indicates that during pre-flight checks, a pilot notices a minor, intermittent anomaly with a non-critical system that is not explicitly listed as a minimum equipment list (MEL) item for immediate dispatch. The airline's Operational Control Center is pushing for an on-time departure to avoid significant passenger disruption and potential financial penalties. The pilot is aware that the anomaly has not historically caused a flight safety issue, but its intermittent nature makes it difficult to definitively rule out a future problem. What is the most appropriate course of action for the pilot in this situation, adhering strictly to aviation regulations and best practices for flight safety? Option A. Delay the flight to consult with maintenance personnel for a thorough inspection and rectification of the anomaly, even if it means a significant schedule disruption. Option B. Attempt a temporary, improvised fix for the anomaly based on operational experience to ensure the flight departs on time. Option C. Request a waiver from the airline's operational control center to depart with the anomaly, citing the non-critical nature of the system. Option D. Proceed with the flight as scheduled, documenting the anomaly for future monitoring, as it is not a critical system failure and has not previously impacted safety. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the flight as scheduled, documenting the anomaly for future monitoring, as it is not a critical system failure and has not previously impacted safety. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a pilot's duty to operate safely and efficiently and the pressure to adhere to a strict schedule that might compromise safety margins. The pilot must exercise sound judgment, prioritizing regulatory compliance and the safety of the flight over potential commercial or operational consequences of a delay. The correct approach involves the pilot making a decision based on the available information and regulatory requirements, even if it leads to a deviation from the planned schedule. This demonstrates adherence to the principle of safety first, a cornerstone of aviation regulation. Specifically, the pilot is obligated by regulations to ensure the aircraft is airworthy and operated within safe parameters. If pre-flight checks reveal a potential issue that could compromise safety, the pilot has the authority and responsibility to delay or cancel the flight until the issue is resolved. This aligns with the overarching goal of aviation authorities to prevent accidents and incidents. An incorrect approach would be to disregard or downplay the identified issue to maintain the schedule. This would be a direct violation of the pilot's responsibility to ensure flight safety and could lead to a breach of operational regulations. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the flight without proper consultation or documentation of the issue, potentially creating a liability for the pilot and the airline. Finally, attempting to fix the issue in a manner not prescribed by the aircraft manufacturer or maintenance manuals would also be a regulatory and safety failure. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Thoroughly assessing the identified issue and its potential impact on flight safety. 2. Consulting relevant operational manuals, checklists, and regulatory guidance. 3. Communicating clearly with relevant parties, e.g., maintenance, dispatch, air traffic control, about the situation and the proposed course of action. 4. Making a decisive judgment that upholds safety standards, even if it incurs operational inconvenience. 5. Documenting all decisions and actions taken. Question 17. Consider a scenario where a pilot is preparing for a scheduled flight. The latest weather forecast for the destination airport indicates a high probability of severe thunderstorms developing shortly after the estimated time of arrival, with visibility potentially dropping below the minimums required for landing. The Airline Operations Center is emphasizing the importance of maintaining the schedule due to passenger connections. The pilot has reviewed the aircraft's performance capabilities and has identified a suitable diversion airport, but it would add significant time and cost to the flight. Which of the following actions best reflects the pilot's professional responsibility and adherence to aviation regulations? Option A. Attempt to land at the destination airport regardless of the forecast, assuming the operations center's pressure to maintain the schedule overrides the pilot's weather concerns. Option B. Delay the departure until the weather forecast is more favorable, even if it means missing the scheduled arrival time and potentially impacting passenger connections. Option C. Proceed with the flight as scheduled, relying on the possibility that the weather may improve or that the pilot can manage the landing in marginal conditions. Option D. Inform the Airline Operations Center of the weather concerns and the potential need for a diversion, proposing a delay in departure until a clearer weather picture emerges or a revised flight plan can be established. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the flight as scheduled, relying on the possibility that the weather may improve or that the pilot can manage the landing in marginal conditions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a pilot's duty to operate safely and efficiently and the pressure to adhere to a strict schedule that may compromise safety. The pilot must exercise sound judgment, prioritizing regulatory compliance and the well-being of passengers and crew over external pressures. Careful consideration of weather forecasts, aircraft performance, and available diversion options is paramount. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the weather conditions at the destination and potential diversion airports, coupled with a clear communication of the safety concerns to the Airline Operations Center. This aligns with the fundamental principles of aviation safety regulations, which mandate that pilots must not operate an aircraft in hazardous weather conditions and must have sufficient fuel for the flight, including reserves for diversions. Specifically, regulations like those found in the Air School Entrance Exams governing framework would emphasize the piloting command's ultimate authority and responsibility for the safe conduct of the flight. This includes the discretion to alter or deviate from the flight plan when safety is compromised. The ethical obligation to protect life and property further reinforces this decision. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the flight without adequately assessing the deteriorating weather, or to dismiss the pilot's concerns due to schedule pressure. This would violate regulations requiring pilots to ensure the safety of the flight before departure and during flight. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt a landing in conditions that are below the minimum specified for the aircraft and airport, or to not carry sufficient fuel for a potential diversion. Such actions would directly contraindicate established safety protocols and could lead to catastrophic outcomes, demonstrating a severe lapse in professional judgment and regulatory adherence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety above all else. This involves 1. Identifying the core issue, safety risk due to weather. 2. Gathering all relevant information, weather reports, aircraft status, fuel levels, diversion options. 3. Consulting applicable regulations and company policies. 4. Evaluating potential courses of action against safety standards and regulatory requirements. 5. Communicating concerns clearly and assertively to relevant parties, e.g., dispatch operations. 6. Making a decision based on the highest standard of safety, even if it incurs delays or costs. Question 18. Operational review demonstrates that during a routine training flight, a student pilot operating a light aircraft experienced intermittent warning lights indicating a potential issue with the aircraft's hydraulic system. The flight instructor, present in the co-pilot seat, observed the warning lights and the student's initial reaction. The instructor must decide on the immediate course of action. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and regulatory compliant response? Option A. Attempt to troubleshoot the hydraulic system issue by consulting online forums and discussing it with other pilots via radio while continuing the flight. Option B. Instruct the student to continue the flight to the intended destination, monitoring the warning lights closely and assuming the issue is minor. Option C. Immediately initiate a precautionary landing at the nearest suitable airport, following emergency procedures and informing air traffic control of the situation. Option D. Advise the student to ignore the warning lights for the remainder of the flight, as they are likely false indications due to the aircraft's age. The correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a precautionary landing at the nearest suitable airport, following emergency procedures and informing air traffic control of the situation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between operational efficiency and the absolute priority of safety regulations. The pilot's decision-making process is under scrutiny, requiring a deep understanding of the regulatory framework governing flight operations. The core of the challenge lies in balancing immediate operational pressures with the non-negotiable mandate of aviation safety, as defined by the Air School Entrance Exam's specified regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a strict adherence to the established procedures for handling in-flight emergencies, prioritizing the safety of the aircraft and its occupants above all else. This aligns directly with the fundamental principles of aviation safety regulations, which mandate that pilots must take all necessary actions to ensure safety, even if it means deviating from the planned flight path or schedule. The regulatory framework emphasizes a proactive and conservative approach to any situation that could compromise safety, requiring immediate and decisive action to mitigate risks. An incorrect approach would be to disregard the warning lights or attempt to continue the flight under the assumption that the issue might resolve itself or is not critical. This directly violates the principle of see and avoid, extended to system monitoring, where any indication of a malfunction, however minor it may seem, must be investigated and addressed. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize reaching the destination to avoid operational disruption or passenger inconvenience. This demonstrates a failure to grasp the absolute priority of safety over schedule adherence, a cornerstone of aviation law and ethics. Finally, attempting to troubleshoot the issue without consulting the appropriate technical manuals or air traffic control, or without a clear understanding of the potential consequences, represents a significant regulatory and ethical lapse, as it bypasses established protocols designed to ensure safe resolution of such issues. Professionals in this field should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with immediate threat identification and assessment. This is followed by a thorough review of available information, warning lights, system status, consultation of emergency checklists and procedures, communication with relevant authorities, air traffic control, company operations, and finally, the execution of the safest course of action, which may involve diverting to an alternate airport. This process ensures that decisions are not made under duress, but are grounded in established safety protocols and regulatory requirements. Question 19. The investigation demonstrates that a student pilot is scheduled for a critical flight test as part of their air school entrance exam. The weather forecast indicates moderate turbulence and reduced visibility due to low cloud cover, conditions that are borderline for safe flight training according to standard operating procedures. The examiner, who is also the pilot in command, is aware that delaying the flight test could significantly impact the student's progress and potentially incur additional costs. The examiner is also aware that the student has expressed eagerness to complete the test. Considering the paramount importance of safety in aviation training and examination, what is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner? Option A. Delay the flight test until more favorable weather conditions are forecast, prioritizing the safety and effectiveness of the training and assessment. Option B. Proceed with the flight test as scheduled, but brief the student on the potential weather challenges and instruct them to fly cautiously. Option C. Conduct a brief visual assessment from the tarmac, and if it appears manageable, proceed with the flight test to avoid disruption. Option D. Proceed with the flight test, but shorten the planned duration to minimize exposure to the adverse weather. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the flight test as scheduled, but brief the student on the potential weather challenges and instruct them to fly cautiously. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a pilot's duty to ensure the safety of flight and the pressure to adhere to a tight schedule, potentially influenced by commercial considerations. The pilot must exercise sound judgment, prioritizing safety above all else, even when faced with external pressures or the desire to avoid operational delays. Careful consideration of all available information and adherence to established procedures are paramount. The correct approach involves the pilot meticulously reviewing all available weather data, including forecasts and real-time reports, and cross-referencing this with the aircraft's operational limitations and the specific requirements of the air school entrance exam syllabus regarding adverse weather operations. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the fundamental principle of aviation safety, which mandates that flight operations should only proceed when conditions are within safe operating parameters and do not compromise the training objectives or the safety of the student pilot. Specifically, aviation regulations, such as those governing flight training and pilot licensing, e.g., relevant sections of the UK's Civil Aviation Authorities, CA, airworthiness requirements or equivalent examination board guidelines, stipulate that flight instructors and pilots in command have the ultimate responsibility for ensuring that flights are conducted safely, and this includes making informed decisions about weather suitability. The decision to delay or cancel a flight due to adverse weather is a standard safety procedure, and the exam likely assesses the candidate's understanding of these safety protocols and their ability to apply them. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the flight solely based on a general understanding that it's usually fine, or by downplaying the significance of the reported adverse weather. This fails to acknowledge the specific risks associated with the current conditions and the potential impact on flight training, which requires stable and predictable conditions for effective learning and assessment. This approach violates the principle of due diligence and could lead to unsafe situations, potentially contravening regulations that require pilots to assess and mitigate risks before and during flight. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize completing the scheduled exam slot over a thorough safety assessment, perhaps by assuming the student pilot will be able to manage the conditions or by feeling pressured by the exam schedule. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the pilot's primary responsibility for safety and a disregard for the potential consequences of flying in unsuitable weather. It prioritizes operational expediency over the well-being of the student and the integrity of the training process, which is ethically and regulatorily unacceptable. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a structured risk assessment. This includes 1. Gathering all relevant information, weather, aircraft status, student experience. 2. Identifying potential hazards, e.g., turbulence, reduced visibility, crosswinds. 3. Evaluating the risks associated with each hazard in the context of the flight's objectives and the aircraft's capabilities. 4. Determining appropriate mitigation strategies, e.g., delaying the flight, choosing an alternative route, canceling. 5. Making a clear, documented decision based on the risk assessment and established safety protocols. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are objective, defensible, and most importantly, prioritize safety. Question 20. The analysis reveals that during pre-flight checks, a pilot identified a minor, intermittent anomaly with a non-critical system. While the anomaly did not immediately compromise flight safety for the planned short-haul flight, the pilot was aware of a tight schedule for subsequent flights. The pilot considered several courses of action to manage this situation. Option A. Attempt to troubleshoot and resolve the anomaly independently without reporting it, to avoid any departure delay. Option B. Proceed with the flight, assuming the anomaly is insignificant and will not affect the flight, and plan to report it upon completion of the day's operations. Option C. Immediately report the anomaly through the official channels as per the airline's operations manual and relevant aviation regulations, even if it causes a slight delay to the departure. Option D. Delegate the reporting of the anomaly to the ground crew, assuming they will handle it appropriately without direct pilot confirmation. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the anomaly through the official channels as per the airline's operations manual and relevant aviation regulations, even if it causes a slight delay to the departure. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a pilot's immediate operational needs and the broader regulatory framework designed for aviation safety. The pilot must exercise sound judgment, balancing the urgency of the situation with the mandatory reporting requirements. Careful consideration of the applicable regulations is paramount to ensure compliance and maintain the integrity of aviation safety reporting systems. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the established procedures for reporting discrepancies, even when faced with operational pressures. This aligns with the core principles of aviation safety regulations, which mandate transparency and thorough documentation of any event that could potentially impact flight safety. By reporting the issue promptly and accurately, the pilot upholds their responsibility to the regulatory authority and contributes to the collective knowledge base used to prevent future incidents. This proactive reporting is a cornerstone of a robust safety culture. An incorrect approach of delaying or omitting the report due to time constraints or a perceived minor nature of the issue represents a significant regulatory failure. Aviation authorities require all relevant information to be documented, regardless of immediate perceived impact, as even seemingly minor issues can be indicators of larger systemic problems or can escalate unexpectedly. Failing to report constitutes a breach of regulatory obligations and undermines the effectiveness of safety oversight. Another incorrect approach, that of attempting to rectify the issue without proper reporting, also carries regulatory and ethical implications. While a pilot's initiative is commendable, bypassing established reporting channels can lead to a lack of oversight, prevent proper investigation, and potentially mask underlying maintenance or operational deficiencies. This can have serious consequences for future flights and the safety of other aircraft. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the regulatory framework. Pilots should be trained to identify reportable events, understand the reporting timelines and procedures, and prioritize compliance. When faced with conflicting demands, the established regulatory process for safety reporting should always take precedence. This involves a systematic evaluation of the situation against regulatory requirements, followed by decisive action to ensure compliance, even if it requires a brief delay in other operational tasks.